Oh boy, it's that time of year, isn't it? Considering we've reviewed the previous two My Hero Academia movies, it's practically a tradition here on the Chunky Beef YouTube experience. As you can probably guess, today we're having a look at World Heroes Mission, the newest one. This particular movie follows Izuku Midoriya, who joins a team of heroes worldwide to track down the culprit of a chemical attack. The movie is more sophisticated than that, of course, but we don't want to spoil anything for those who haven't watched it yet. Odds are, if you're here, you're probably familiar with the franchise, and thus you're the target audience for this sort of movie. If you're looking for a recommendation on whether or not to see it, which is also tradition here on this channel, you'll be happy to hear the World Heroes Mission is pretty easily the best of the three movies. There's a lot of things they learned from the last two movies that they applied to this one that really improved the experience. For example, the movie treats you as if you're familiar with the story and the lore. One of my biggest pet peeves with this series is that it constantly informs you about basic world lore that shouldn't exist beyond the first season. Things about quirks, heroes in general, so on. Even things that fans might not be entirely familiar with, such as the quirk doomsday theory, aren't really delved that deep into, but are still presented and explained in a basic enough way that the information can be inferred, which saves a lot of time. Also, this movie doesn't do what the previous two did, such as blatant reuse of the movie's animation to save time and budget, and it almost completely avoids the most egregious sin of all for MHA movies, throwing scenes and screenshots of the anime into the movie. The first movie was the most guilty of this, and the second was better about it, but it still did it. But here, it's almost non-existent, which brought a tear to my eye. Best of all, perhaps, is that they learned to stop introducing and spotlighting a billion characters that they can't possibly hope to flesh out in the span of an hour and a half. As a result, there's a lot more time for them to do things that actually affect the movie, like helping us give a shit about the new characters. This doesn't necessarily land perfectly, but the fact that it does this better than the previous two movies by going with the less is more angle is a breath of fresh air. So to answer that pressing question, should you watch this movie? In the simplest way possible, yeah, absolutely go see it if you're a fan of My Hero Academia. It should scratch all those itches you might have while waiting for new content, at least for a little while. Now, on to the spoilers.
Oh my god! Okay, it's happening!
So while World Heroes Mission is much better than the first two movies by a solid margin, it's not without its flaws. A good example of this is the villain and his motivations. Fleck-Turn, leader of Humorize, shows his hand by setting off a single trigger bomb which mobilizes the heroes and brings all of them into one place at various Humorize facilities. It's such an odd choice to let the heroes go, essentially, when the entire second half of the plot revolves around bringing them all together yet again so that he can dispatch them. What was stopping him from setting off more trigger bombs when the heroes arrived to attack Humorize early on in the movie? You can argue that it's a stealth mission and there's probably not enough time, but I'm not convinced. The guy acted, the heroes reacted as Fleck-Turn predicted they would, not just once, but twice. While we're on the topic of Fleck-Turn, the guy gives this movie an almost Saturday morning cartoon villain sort of vibe by giving the heroes a set amount of time to evacuate people towards the end of the movie, when his entire plot is to kill as many people as possible with quirks, including the pro-heroes, so there's minimal resistance to his rule when the dust settles. Why then would he give the heroes a chance? Gloat at them, then set off the trigger bombs, sit back and relax? Most of the pro-heroes are already in major civilian areas, so it's not like you're gonna miss a lot of them. Another gripe I had, which in hindsight is more of a nitpick than anything else, is that Todoroki's fight wasn't all that great. It felt like they knew exactly what they wanted from Midoriya and Bakugo's fight, but then they remembered that they had to give Todoroki a fight, and so it felt really shoehorned in. I feel like having Todoroki join Midoriya for his fight would have probably had a better impact, but I guess they felt like the stakes were going to be higher if Midoriya soloed his fight, so it just wasn't the case. Last but not least, I felt like there was a distinct lack of spectacle from this movie compared to Heroes Rising, the previous film. It felt like they pulled out every single stop possible to make the final fight this absolute nutty visual spectacle, and it's easily one of my favorite fights in either the anime or the movies. However, the final fight between Fleck-Turn and Midoriya is basically the same thing over and over again, just a battle of attrition, which doesn't work great. Not to say that there's no spectacle to be found here, but it just doesn't really stack up to the previous movie, sorry. So that's more or less what the movie does poorly. Then what does the movie do right? Well, for starters, most of the fights are amazing, even though they can be a bit tough to follow from time to time, and for a shonen series, you want cool fights. So I feel like World Heroes Mission ticks most of those boxes. There's also the aforementioned less is more approach to the movie. As much as I love a lot of the cast of characters the series has to offer, this movie greatly benefited from a minimization of the characters we have to follow on screen. It made it way easier for me to give a shit about Rhodey's soul, because he was basically the only new character besides Fleck Turn. For a good chunk of the movie, it's just Midoriya, Todoroki, Bakugo, and new character Rhodey's soul. And everyone else has limited time as supporting cast. That's it. And as much as it pains me to say it, it's a choice I hope they move forward with for future movies. Not so much that they have to go with just the big three there, but just keep the number of characters to the barest of minimums while paying service to the rest of the cast where applicable, like this movie does. And while the plot and the villain have that aforementioned, very distinct Saturday morning cartoon villain feel, it doesn't detract from the overall vibe of the movie in a bad way. I feel like it does a good job of approaching everything from a lore perspective by encompassing the quirk Doomsday Theory as the motivation for the villain's plans. I'm not totally sold on Fleck Turn's backstory, why he chooses to want to genocide people with quirks, but that sort of folds everything into that campy villain trope. The motivations there are silly, even the protagonists poke holes in it, and it exists purely to give the protagonist a reason to come into conflict with the antagonist. Anyway, thanks for hanging out with me. How'd you feel about the movie? If you've seen it, let me know in the comments. And of course, if you want more chunky beef, subscribe to my channel here or follow me on Twitter, link in the description below. See you soon.